You're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. We're back at Exmouth Forest School today and I'm delighted to be chatting to some familiar voices. I'm joined by one of our directors, Chev Pring, and our staff welfare officers, Rowan Pring and Pete Shepherd. We're down at the training site sitting around the campfire, although it's not actually lit because it's quite warm today, to discuss the concept of journaling. We'll be looking at these from both a learning and therapeutic angle and looking at the intersection where these meet. It's such a pleasure to be able to facilitate this conversation between some fantastic people, so thanks for joining me today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah, nice to be here.
So I asked you all here today because I've had conversations with a couple of you about the concept of journals and journaling, but in really different contexts. So I thought it'd be interesting to introduce the concept to those that might not know what we're talking about and to explore the different approaches that you can take and the benefits of using journals. So let's start by someone, I don't mind which of you, explaining what we mean when we talk about journaling. I don't know who wants to start. You're all too polite.
We're very polite. So in the therapeutic world, journaling is a really good intervention whereby someone can bring from their internal world out into the external world, their thoughts, feelings and practice. And this will enable people to get a deeper understanding of patterns, of themes, but it also provides that moment where someone can stop and just reflect. We live in a fast-moving world today where often we move from one thing to the other and we don't have that opportunity. So journaling provides that opportunity, that intervention whereby we can bring from our internal world into the external those things that are really going on and gaining a better insight into what's really going on for me in the here and now.
With learning journaling, it's a very similar process actually, but rather than kind of internal to external, it's abstract to concrete. So it really helps with defining your thought process and really clarifying for yourself what it is you're trying to say and record. And it also really helps with the transition between declarative and procedural knowledge.
Okay, can you explain kind of what process. Those kind of knowledges are for people that might not know?
So it's well in that learning sense that is abstract to concrete. Okay. It's so declarative knowledge is where it's known but it's abstract.
Okay.
And then procedural is where you start to place that into your everyday learning. So you put it into a context, you put it into your kind of experience and are actually able to use it.
Okay.
And we tend to go on that journey with learning from, you have a kind of key insight and then you tend to remap your schema once you've done that bit of learning and go, oh, how do I then apply that to all these other areas in my life? How do I make use of that knowledge? And using a journal is a really useful way of helping you go through that process.
Okay. And when we talk about journaling, are we just talking about people just writing, or like what other kind of ways that people use journals?
I think journaling really can be as creative as you want it to be. It can be quite intimidating to think about the blank page. So we can use the blank page just to write, to free write, to use certain strategies to write in a more kind of formulaic way or more structured, processed way. We can also buy journals that have prompts already in them, that kind of prompt certain practices or thought processes. We can think creatively about journaling as well. We can use mark making and colour and texture, things from nature, rubbings, any kind of artwork in journaling that expresses, as Pete said, that inner world externally. We can also use the journal to kind of emulate processes of processing emotions. So for example, if you write in your journal, you might write down something you're feeling angry about and then you tear the page out, you rip it up, you bury it, you burn it, things like that. So we can take it beyond the journal into an emotionally processing kind of strategy. So it's really getting people to think outside the box of journaling. It doesn't have to be this neat, perfect kind of journal. It can be any size you want. You can make it yourself.
It doesn't have to be Dear Diary.
No.
I think that's really, really key. What Rowan said there, that idea that it doesn't have to be perfect. I think the best thing you can do with a journal is mess it up right from the start, because if it's kind of too neat, you're almost worried about what you're putting in it, and that's really not the point at all.
Yeah,
it's true. There's also something to be said for verbal journaling. Lots of people I work with who struggle to even contemplate the empty page. The blank page is too scary. Where do I begin? What do I do? So I've done a lot of work with clients, particularly around verbal journaling. So they have a conversation with themselves.
Okay.
But to the point where they're not talking to themselves, they're talking about themselves. So they take themselves off to a place where they're on their own, they're isolated, it's confidential. And they can begin to articulate through vocabulary, through volume, through tone, what's going on for them. And again, that can be a very creative way for journaling.
Okay. And I mean, Ray, you've just touched on this briefly, but what might a journal look like? So obviously people could just use any old notebook, or is there a thing that people might want to consider when they're trying to decide what to use for their journal?
Yeah, so I think the main things to consider really is thinking about where you want to be using the journal. So do you want to just be sat at home using the journal? Do you want to be able to carry it around with you? That's obviously going to determine the size and the kind of the weight of it. It's what kind of style of journaling you might want to be doing. Do you want to just be having pen and paper? Do you want to be using artwork? Do you want to be using it in a kind of free way or more structured way? And the frequency of the journal as well, that's going to determine whether it's something you have one journal that you use at home, one that you might keep at work, one that you might keep in the car for if you're driving around and stopping. So yeah, any old notebook, old books with blank pages in, or that you want to write over or paint over. You can make
thought of that. That's a cool idea.
Something called redaction poetry, where you redact the words in a book and leave only the words that you want to express how you're feeling.
Cool.
So that's a form of journaling that isn't just, you're not relying on just yourself to think about what to write. Or make your own journals, just pieces of paper stapled, glued together, woven together, sewn together, using bark, leaves, whatever you might want to. A journal can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah.
And as long as it fits the purpose of where and when you want to be journaling and how, there's really, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I use my journal as an extension of myself. In a similar way to the way we use our mobile phones. So I carry it everywhere I go. Everywhere, always have it on me. It's always in the car if it's not directly with me, but I always take it out of the house whenever I go. And I use it for everything from writing shopping lists to kind of free form kind of prose, trying to kind of understand my emotional state, and anything in between is always with me in meetings. I put ideas in there, I sketch in there, I doodle in there, I use it for everything, and I think for me that's the real value, is that it's very much just an extension of my brain in that way, and that's kind of a really useful way of me helping to kind of make sense of my day on a daily basis and what I'm doing.
If you're using it for work as well as for like personal reasons, that mean that you're getting through quite a few?
Yeah. So I've got a really nice leather case that you can just put a different notebook in each time, and I go through 3 or 4 notebooks a year.
Do you have a way?
I go through a lot. Yeah.
Do you have a way of? This sounds stupid. If you had like a good work idea, then like 3 months later, you're like, which one did I write it in? Like, do you have a way of remembering where it was, or do you just end up searching through your books trying to find your good idea?
So I have another journal that I code all of my kind of future projects and ideas in, and that's a bit more. That's got quite a set formula. So when I get to the end of one journal, I will go through it and I will note down the things that I need to kind of remember for the future. And then I archive them all, so I do know where they all are, and I can refer back to them, and I do quite often refer back to them, especially that kind of couple of months crossover. I quite often go, it's in my journal somewhere, and it's not, and I'm like, it's in the other one, and then I have to go back and like transfer it over, because I've but the fact that I've written that down in the journal prompts me to remember that in a way where if I hadn't written that down, it would have just gone
out of your
and
head.
I would never have recalled that in the same way. So even if I'm having to kind of go back through the kind of archive, it's still a really useful process for me.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's start by thinking about journaling as a practice, as a kind of tool in your mental health toolkit. What benefits, like Rowan Pete, do you think that journaling has from that kind of therapeutic and self-care perspective? I mean, you touched on it briefly in the beginning, but just if we could expand on that, that'd be great.
So over the past, particularly past 20 years, our academic study has been bringing to light the benefits to not just to mental health, but also to that holistic understanding of health. So there are five big things that can be said about those academic studies over the years. One of them, that journaling is it provides a great opportunity to begin to move from being reactive to proactive in terms of our reflection. So instead of reflecting on what we experience in the here and now, just as it is, we're able to see where patterns emerge and where we behave in certain ways whenever we find ourselves in those similar situations. So research has shown that journaling provides that framework for reflective practice to become a natural part of who we are. So it's not something that we have to force ourselves to do, it's something that we naturally do, and that's certainly come through the studies. Another one is with regards to depression. It helps to locate depression within a bigger landscape. It moves depression away from thinking about how I am in the now moment. It allows us to see that wider landscape of depression, which enables us not only to reflect on where we've been with depression, but also in terms of how we look at the future. It's very supportive in that way. Again, journaling supports in trauma recovery. Research shows that people who've experienced deep trauma, who begin to journal around that trauma, that the recovery seems to be far deeper and allows them to transition through that trauma in a way which is more creative, more supportive, and ongoing, provides greater benefits to cognitive and emotional health care, which is really good. I think the last one I'd want to say really is that in terms of anxiety and stress, journaling can create a high sense of resilience, because we can go through an experience which has been stressful or has provided us triggers of high anxiety. Looking back at our journal, we can look and say, well, actually, I've been in similar places before, I survived. I lived to tell the tale. It wasn't the climatic, life-ending moment I thought it was at the time, and I can take learning from that going forward, that when I am in similar situations where levels of anxiety or stress are high, I can process them in a different way, because I know they're not going to crush me, they're just going to wound me, and I can work with that. I don't have to give into it or give way by it. I can just simply work with it, so that I can see that I'm always growing my resilience for future experience.
Yeah.
I think in addition to what Pete said, I mean, I've used journaling pretty much my whole life in various forms. I think two of the most important and powerful things about journaling is it helps us to be seen and heard by ourselves. It provides the opportunity for, if in life we don't necessarily feel seen and heard by others, or we aren't confident to speak up and to meet our own needs, it provides that space where we are honouring how we feel, what we think, what we're going through. We are investing in time and self-care to go, I matter, how I feel matters, and I'm going to take some time to write about it, to think about it. So being seen and heard by ourselves is incredibly powerful, and it's an empowering tool, because in that exploration, in that process of seeing and hearing ourselves, we find our own answers. We realise that, you know, what we really need, what we really want, what's going on for us. We have a better understanding of ourselves. And as Pete said, you know, that space to express our thoughts and feelings and to work through things allows us to develop more balanced thought processes and healthier thought processes over time. And I think something that I've certainly used for journaling is to track kind of patterns and progress of emotions. Like Pete said, I might go, I'm just feeling awful all the time at the moment, and actually if I look back and track certain emotions over a month, maybe it's more balanced than I think. So then I can go, maybe it hasn't been a terrible month, I've just focused on the bits that felt tough, and actually the reality was a more balanced picture.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't know whether you do this, but I've heard about crafters, like knitters and crocheters, doing like a temperature blanket over the year for how they're feeling. So they'll do like a row in the, like they've got a different colour for each mood, and then they'll do like one row that day for how their mood was. So at the end of the year, they can kind of, it's like a mental health audit to see, what colour did I feel mostly. So I guess that's another extension of that, like. Yeah,
it's really similar to something that I use. So I'll choose 3 emotions. Obviously, you can choose more. One, kind of a positive emotion, a neutral emotion, and then a more challenging emotion. So it might be, joy, contentment, stress. And I draw a little bar next to each one, and then I fill it with colour, like a highlighter. So it goes 0 to 100, and then each day you just quickly fill it in, and then you can look over time and go, that's gone up, that's gone down. And then once you develop that as a practice, it naturally kind of brings in that interest of, well, why has it gone up and down? Maybe I want to now start tracking the weather or my activity or people I've seen or things I've done, and then you kind of build that in. Or you might go, actually, I don't want to track those other things, I want to explore what anxiety feels like for me, or what stress does, or what joy looks like for me. Or so it's quite a good kind of jumping off platform, and very simple, very quick to do if you set aside.
You do that every day?
I don't currently, but I have done
in the past,
periods of time for months on end. You kind of set aside a bit of time to draw that out, or you do it on a laptop and print it out. Just those little bars that you can see. I'm sure tech people could do that kind of online journaling and have it all in a which I wouldn't do myself. I like the kind of the handwritten.
That's very cool.
So
Chev, same question for you really. We've been talking about how they could use it as part of their mental health toolkit, but for a young person's learning journey, how can we use journals, and what's the benefits of them using them?
Really interesting hearing what Pete and Rowan were saying there, because a lot of what they're talking about there is exactly the process that we would go through in terms of re-regulation and restorative practice, but what they're talking about is that the person at the centre of that is in control, and that's what we are trying to move towards with everything that we do in learning. So our whole approach, the whole constructivist approach to education, is about the experience of the learner being absolutely crucial to making sense of that learning. The only way it becomes meaningful is through their own experience. Now that requires the learner to really do 2 things, but they need to have that breadth of experience in the first place, and that's something that we can provide to them. The second thing they really need is the control over their own learning. It has to come from them, it can't be put into them, and that's where learning and journaling really unite, because it provides them with that ability to take control. It's their journal, they use it any way they want, they can journal in any way they want, and the point is whatever they do tells you something. So if they rip it up and throw it in the bin, that's something you can unpick. That's a bit of learning, that's experiential. So it's not that you can't do it wrong. It's really powerful in that sense. There's no sense of failure to it, but there's a real sense of being able to connect the dots. And when they start to understand that this piece of learning here can have an impact on all of these other areas, and they start to map that out, the journal can provide that concrete point where they can refer back to. And that's really powerful once they start that process to go, okay, I understand that bit of learning there isn't discrete. I can apply that to this bit of learning over here in an academic context, but I can also apply that same bit of learning to my personal life and how I interact with my friends, or I can use that as a tool for helping me deal with how I'm feeling, or and when we start to map things across that whole experience in that way and join those dots up, that's when that learning really starts to have a deep kind of experiential context, and that's when it becomes really meaningful for them. And a journal is just such a powerful way of creating that space to kind of hold that learning and control it for the learner themselves. It's also really key, if you look at a lot of the studies on learning, where you are goal setting or future orientated in what you're doing, when you write that down, it has a profound impact on your ability to succeed in those goals. It maps that kind of existential thought into something concrete. It's making a commitment to yourself. It's making something concrete that you're putting a flag in the sand, so to speak. And there's been studies done on the impact that has in terms of goal achievement, and it really has a significant impact on how that works. So in terms of from a learning perspective, learners having their own targets and writing them down in their journal and taking ownership of that goal setting aspect is really powerful for them, and we see that in the school all the time, where learners will refer back. I've witnessed and been part of conversations where learners have gone, can you remind me what my target is, or I just need to go and check what my target is in my book, or this is my target and this is what I'm doing towards it. All of that thinking and all of that kind of process comes from them feeling in control of what their learning is and knowing what their targets are, and being a part of that process. If you take that away from them and go, we're just going to give you a target, there's
not the same.
There's no incentive, there's no buy-in, there's no, not in the same way. So that's really crucial. And again, the learning journal is a really core part of how we move that forward.
How did you introduce the journals to the learners? Like they're this academic year, you've introduced them to them, isn't it?
Yeah, we introduced them to staff as well. So everyone's going through the process at the same time. I don't believe that. I don't believe in teachers. That's why we call them tutors. The point,
we like the word facilitate, don't we?
Yeah. Well, the point is, if it's experiential, your job is to create a broad range of experiences and then go on a learning journey with those learners, and that means you're a learner too. So I think it's really important to remember that we're all on the same journey, and our job is to support, but our job isn't to put lots in. Like, where we do put things in and the teaching is being put in, it's that what we're teaching them is a tool that they can go and use. So really good example, we might teach a child to read because that's a metacognitive tool. They can, if they know how to read, they can access learning. So teaching that is really important. What we then absolutely don't do is tell them what to read. And if they want to read the encyclopedia or Lord of the Rings or the Beano or the Haynes manual for a Ford Fiesta, who cares? The point is, that's their journey. We've put that tool in place. That's the teaching. We don't tell them what to do with it. What we do is we go on that journey with them. And if you think about that, any one of those, the learning we can do and we can extend, and the mapping across the curriculum from any of those, if you're looking at creating comics, or working on a car, or reading Lord of the Rings in the kind of fantasy world, and all of those offer opportunities to go into vast amounts of learning across every subject area. We don't need to tell them what to do. We go with them, and we go on that journey with them. And if they're mapping that themselves and going, this is what I'm interested in, and they're kind of they're mapping that journey, then so much the better, because eventually we don't need to go on that journey with them, and they can do it on their own.
When you introduced it, how... Oh, sorry, Vera, you were going to say that.
I was just going to ask, I can imagine as well that it helps them develop a responsibility for their own thoughts and feelings and ideas, because if they're, if they sat with a tutor or a member of staff and were asked these questions and then someone else wrote it down, it's kind of detached, isn't it, where they're writing it down, they're going, I'm thinking about this, how am I feeling, what am I wanting, what are my targets, how does it feel to write that target if I really imagine it. I know those are quite complex processes that would develop over time, but that sense of responsibility of this is me and this is who I am in the world and this is what I'm putting out into the world, that kind of ownership of it all to do it themselves.
In my experience, the reluctance to write comes from the fact that learners don't understand that writing is a powerful form of communication. It allows them to speak in a voice that they can't when they're talking. And I think as soon as you break that down for them, it really becomes a massively powerful tool, and they understand that it adds a great weight and a breadth to what they can say and the way they can communicate. And if they see that as a tool and they see that as something that is advantageous to them, of course they'll write. If they see it as, well, I could just say it, so why would I write it? It's a chore, so it's about kind of helping them, that again, that's the bit we put in. How do we help them take ownership of that and understand that that's a really powerful kind of way of them communicating, and then leaving them to it and letting them go, you write, this is you, and this is a way of you expressing yourself in the world that is different. You can speak to maybe 100 people in a day, but if you write something and you put it out there on the internet, you could speak to millions of people in a day. That kind of thing is suddenly you go, oh, okay, this is a really interesting tool that allows my voice to be seen in a different way. That's really powerful. And journaling is a really good way of doing that, because it's complete. You can't fail. So you're learning a new skill, but you can't get it wrong, because it kind of anything goes. It becomes a really useful tool for that.
It does, certainly in the kind of therapeutic world which we work. That's so key. One thing that journaling provides is kind of that mapping out, which I really warm to. That journaling allows us to bring into our awareness what's going on for us in our felt sense, cognitions, our thoughts, our emotions and feelings. We can bring them to our awareness. From our awareness, we can then recognise what's really happening, and we can begin to label with a greater sense of understanding the meanings that we're feeling in terms of that awareness. Then we can move into acceptance. I accept them. I'm not wrong. I'm not daft. I'm not mad. It's just part of my reality. And then from acceptance, we can move to that sense of transformation. I can transform that in terms of how I understand me. So that mapping, again, can be very therapeutic in terms of our self-learning, our self-knowledge, in moving us from where we are to where we seek to be. It can be really, really useful.
I'm wondering as well, thinking of the learners' journals, are they kind of introduced to more creative methods of journaling? So, for example, I'm thinking you've mentioned kind of targets as an example. I'm imagining, on each page they write the target at the top of the page, and then as time goes on they fill in the page working up to the top of the page with colour, with leaves, with collage, with something to kind of map that I'm getting there and I've achieved it. Or for example, something that they find a barrier to, when they overcome that barrier, could they take out that page and burn it on the fire? Or do you see, is there that kind of element introduced, or is it more keeping it all in the journal? I'm wondering if there's creative elements introduced as well.
That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer, but I very much would be open to all of that. It's whatever works for them. The point is, it's their journal.
Have you been the one that's introduced the journals to them?
No, I've introduced the concept of journaling across the school,
and then they've
okay. But I do know that they are given time to do a reflective journal every day, and so I think we're quite early on in the process, but I very much would see whatever works for them. Being, I don't want to be too prescriptive on it. I want to kind of give them that blank canvas. I think that's quite key. And some of them will sit and write for 10 minutes, and some of them will, I don't know, stick a handprint of mud in it and walk away, and they're both fine.
Absolutely.
I think that's the point. Is it's their journal, and having that ownership is key. That's the first thing. And then where they are maybe starting to struggle to be able to record the things they want to record, or they're becoming frustrated with the process, that's where we might go, these are some options for how you could start to journal in a different way to help. I think that's kind of how I would see that working. I think
it starts with them. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know how they've been received by the learners?
As you'd expect, a bit of a mixed bag, but
yeah.
I think on the whole positively.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who hasn't seen the benefit of journaling once the penny's dropped. Like it's not always an easy process to get into. I think especially if people kind of think of it as a kind of dear diary and it's got to be done every day, and there's people put a lot of barriers in their own head in place.
Absolutely.
And I think if you can get rid of all of that and just go whatever, whenever, make it your own, doesn't matter what it looks like. I think once people start to understand how free it can be, I don't know anyone who hasn't seen the benefit of that.
Nice. We did briefly, Pete, you mentioned earlier about verbal journaling, and Ro, I think you mentioned something about online stuff, but like I think Chev, I think I've had this conversation with you about there's something about the act of putting pen to paper that's a bit more powerful and impactful. What is it about that kind of pen to paper that you think has more of an impact than just kind of typing things into a Word document? Or
I think it comes down to the fact that it's an extension of yourself in a way that a computer or a phone just isn't. So we might make, notes on our phone, and they're quite easily forgotten. It's more personal. It is definitely a part of it. The other part of it is where the studies have been done. They do show that the act of physically connecting what you're thinking and what you're writing is that it's like you will learn better if you learn the same thing in a brand new context. There's some and it's that you connect neural pathways in a different way, and I think that kind of thinking and writing does the same thing. It helps you to form those connections in a deeper way than typing or speaking does. It's that kind of actually physically putting it down is really quite key.
I think there's also something to be said for a pen and a bit of paper is more primitive. I think we can hide behind a font, we can hide behind how a page is set up on a computer, whereas there's something very primitive about a pen and a paper. We can't hide. Whatever we write in our own style. We don't have vocabulary, we don't have a spell checker. We have our own handwriting style. And so it is more primitive, which I think is really, really supportive. And for many that's quite scary. Many people would sooner read what they've written in a font which they like, rather than seeing their own handwriting. But I think there's also something more primitive with regards to it takes agency on my part. I need to do something physical. Whilst yes, typing on a keyboard is physical, there's something even more physical about taking a bit of paper, taking a pen, a pencil, and crafting something from scratch. We're not using something else, but it's solely coming from us. So whatever we write is purely from us. There's no other, Microsoft haven't had a hand in it. It's purely from me. I think also it allows us to disconnect from what we're doing, so we can come out of the pace of life, we can come out of our kind of schedule for that day, and the very nature of doing it means that we're stopping. We're actually doing something which is countercultural to our day. We live in a digital world where we either download, we stream, we do everything. This is something which is really, really countercultural, because it involves a different skill set. It involves a different use of my time. It involves the use of the space where I'm in. So that primitive aspect to it, I think, is really supportive in actually really getting down to the nitty-gritty of who am I? What's going on for me now?
Yeah.
I think as well, using digital forms, unless, as Pete said, like recording, because then you're really getting the raw form of your own voice, and hearing that back can be incredibly powerful. In terms of writing, there's a real interruption to the process with writing. So if I'm writing with pen and paper, I might write really small and neat, and that's telling me something. Am I feeling like I don't have the courage at the moment to be heard, to speak up? Is that why my writing's small and neat? If I can be really quick with my writing, and then I might be quick with my writing, then I might be with my typing. I can change words to different sizes, or really scratch them out, or underline them very quickly. I don't have to go, hang on, where's the bold, where's this, that. There's not that interruption to the process. We can be much more free in our expression, and we can blend then, size, style. We can write in circles, we can write around the page, we can write, in any way we want. We can fold the paper. There's a lot more freedom that you can absolutely be very creative with online programs, but you have to engage that kind of very practical, kind of logical part of the brain that then interrupts that emotional freedom and expression in the moment, when you've just got the freedom of pen and paper to just be very raw. And then that can really aid reflection of going, okay, that word, look how big I wrote that word. That's what's that about for me?
Yeah.
Or, looking at your writing over time, and does that say anything? Is that part of the expression?
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. I had a question about talking about the intersection between using journals for therapeutic and learning purposes, but I think we've kind of already talked quite a lot about the overlap, but just didn't know if there's anything anyone else wanted to add about that kind of intersection between using them for both purposes.
No, for me, the therapeutic use is learning. It's that simple. That learning doesn't end when class finishes. That's not how experiential learning works. So anything and everything you learn about yourself is part of that process. I wouldn't see a distinction. Certainly with what I do, it will be anything from a page full of figures from a finance meeting through to a very much kind of stream of consciousness, or I will write questions to myself to try and solve problems, or it's all of it, and it's all in the same notebook. I don't personally see a distinction at all.
I think the great thing about this podcast is it's really bringing together what was always together, but society has taken apart, has pulled apart. External knowledge, how I function within the world, with internal knowledge of who I am in the world. I think society has forged those two things as distinct as well. I think we're saying in its podcast is actually those two things are part of the same. There is no distinction. There's no dichotomy about the two. They are part of the same thing. About human development.
It's two sides of the same coin, isn't it?
Awesome.
And learning comes from everywhere.
Yeah.
I think that really is how it works for me. I mean, I was literally listening to Pulp in the car this morning, and some of the lyrics have taken me off down an academic rabbit hole around kind of how we approach the use of privilege in education. It's like anything can be an inspiration. I think that's the point, isn't it? And that will go in the notebook, otherwise I'll forget it. So that's why that's important. So
and you've written it down already?
No, but it's going in. I didn't have time before the podcast, but that's I think that in terms of the learning, that's where the journal sits for me, is the kind of the middle of the hourglass. You've got all these influences and experiences, and it's a way of making sense of them yourself through journaling, that then allows them to become an influence on everything else in your life. I think that would be how I would see that.
But one of the things that you're showing as well, Chev, in terms of having multiple journals, that even your journal then becomes a point of learning for you in terms of being able to reflect back. And you're building up a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience, which you're able then to bring back to the now moment. So it's kind of adding again to your sense of learning.
That's awesome. So if someone is listening to this and thinking they want to start journaling themselves, but they feel a bit overwhelmed, and you mentioned this earlier, Ro, about that kind of blank page in front of you, what were tips that you guys might give them for just getting started?
I think I would encourage people to think about, as I said earlier, the where do you want to be journaling, and with that be, care for yourself. Do you want to be sat in a crowded cafe journaling and opening up about emotions and things? Maybe you want to journal about your learning from the day, but maybe not how you feel about things. So be mindful of where you feel safe and comfortable to journal, and that will inform then the kind of the size and type of journal. I think if you're going for the kind of blank page, free writing can be a really good one. So if you set a timer for 3 minutes and write, it has been proven that even if you don't know what to write, after 3 minutes something will emerge. So even if you're writing, I don't know what to write, I don't know what I'm doing here, I'm not sure what I'm saying, I don't know what to write, over and over, at 3 minutes something will emerge.
I was thinking, I read an essay from a famous author who was arguing that writer's block doesn't exist. She was like, people procrastinate and distract themselves. She was like, if you sit in front of a computer or a notebook for long enough, she's like, you will write. Like, it's just that usually we get distracted or bored. She's like, so same kind of thing.
That commitment to just sitting with that boredom and that frustration, that's part of it. Journaling isn't just, oh, this is fantastic and everything's great. Everything that comes up, just like everything is learning, everything is a valuable emotion. And I think if you get to that point then, or you're at that point where you're writing, you're filling pages, but you don't really know what to do with that. You think, I want to look at that further. How might I do that? You can highlight 3 words within what you've written. Just skim read whatever you've written and pick out 3 words that just stand out to you. Don't overthink it. Just go that. Then of those 3 words, write them out again and write for another 3 minutes just around those 3 words. See what comes up. And you can repeat that as many times as you want to see, that can deepen it. As I said earlier, you can do the kind of the emotion tracking. I use it as well, not just each day to kind of see how things are. I use it before and after things. So for example, maybe before and after a walk. So before a walk, I'll list emotions. However, you can do however many you want, even just one. Then you do whatever it is. It could be anything. It might be self-care practice, it might be doing chores, and then you rate the emotion again after that thing and just see. It's just exploring what information is here. How does doing that thing, that activity or that hobby or that task impact me? You can develop practices as well, and that might mean you go and buy a gratitude journal, or you might go and buy a self-care journal, or you write down those practices daily until they become internalized. So there's the classic of 3 things I'm grateful for today, but if you want to be a bit more creative, you can tear out bits from your journal or use post-its to journal around the house. Write little thank you notes to objects in your house. Thank the TV for what it does, thank the sofa, pin it up around your house. Gratitude doesn't have to be just those 3 things I'm grateful for. So it's thinking outside the box a little bit. More creative kind of journaling, you can, for example, again, without overthinking it, draw a shape in your journal, fill it with a pattern, then a colour. Write down what emotion this shape represents for you. Once you've done those 3 things, what is this emotion for me? And ask, what does it need? Close your eyes and imagine meeting this need. Really, really imagine what that feels like. Embody that. I've met this need. What does that feel like? Then redraw the shape. Has it changed? Has the pattern changed? Has the colour changed? Has the shape changed? Has it changed in size, intensity, that kind of thing? Again, it's just exploring. It's looking for information. What do you notice? So I think it's, those are just a few ideas for kind of where to start. And I would recommend, if the blank page is feeling daunting, start with a smaller journal, an A5 journal. Don't buy a big A4 journal and go, where on earth do I start? Those are just a few ideas to begin with.
Awesome. So always 3 words come to mind. The first one's expectation. Whenever we are coming to journaling for the first time, we need to manage what those expectations are. If you're used to going into Waterstones and looking at the biography section and thinking all of these journals that people have published, you're going to look at that and say, I can't compete, I can't come close. So it's lowering expectations, and it's recognising what journal is. Journaling isn't for others, it's for me. So, as Chev said earlier, I don't have to be perfect. If my wording's wrong or I feel clumsy, it doesn't matter. It's for me. It's just for me. So it's managing those expectations, bringing them down, so that it's not a daunting thing, but actually become that natural expression of just how my brain works and I feel. The second word would be experience. Start with an experience, as Rowan has said. But give it an experience. Just don't overthink it. If there's a particular experience that's on your mind, an experience that you're curious about, an experience that you're really happy about, it doesn't have to be something which is really difficult. It can be something which is really happy and pleasurable. Start with that experience. And then my third word would be exploration. Explore it. Let it take you on a journey. A journey which you don't know as you start where that destination is, but start with the journey. See where it takes you. Because you'll find as you read it back, think, goodness me, I didn't think of that. Or, I'm interested, I wrote that. What's that really telling me about myself? So it's kind of coming at it with, as I say, those three things. Managing expectations, allowing myself to begin with an experience, and then just taking that for a ride, exploring what that looks like for me.
I think for me, because it is quite personal, I like to have a really nice journal, but that doesn't mean it has to be neat. So I've got a nice leather-bound notebook. I found a particular pen that I really like, and I'm really fussy about the paper and the feel of it because I write in it all the time. I just, that action of writing is quite important for me, and I take it everywhere. So size is really key. It needs to be something I can carry around with me easily. And I take it on walks and all sorts. I've wandered across Dartmoor with this notebook, and and I think for me that's really important because I don't know where inspiration's going to come from. I don't know when I'm going to connect the dots, and I need to be able to just get that down.
I feel like you might need a matching dry bag for it. Just keep it safe.
I think the really important thing for me is that you can't go wrong, and anything goes. If you're sat there with a blank page and you don't know what you journaling is about, right? I don't know what this journal's about. That's the point of it. It's there to help you solve problems as much as anything else. So when you encounter a problem, put it in the journal. I've just been flicking back through my journal. What it covers is huge. I mean, I got really complex kind of organisation charts. I've got stuff from financial meetings and reports, and then I've got diagrams and charts. I've got a map of a site in here, which is literally just a scribble. I've got diagrams that don't make much sense because they're the first draft. I've got all sorts of different things in there. And what I do is I'll put it in, and if it's not right, turn the page, start again. You don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to erase it. You don't have to struggle with it. Just that's one of the beauties of it. Is it's just there's another page. Turn the page, redraw it, rewrite it, whatever. It's the act of doing that is what's helping you with the sense making. That's what's going to make sense. I've got pages in some of my notebooks that are literally 2 words, and the rest is a blank page. And I've gone that whatever thought process I've gone through, those 2 words is all I've needed to help me make sense of it. Turn the page. Start again. Whatever comes next, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be complex, doesn't have to be pretty, doesn't have to be detailed. It's just there to help you with whatever it is you're trying to solve. Whether that's emotional, whether that's work related, whether it's personal, whether it's a shopping list. It doesn't matter. That's the point. You can use it for everything. It's so versatile.
I have a work journal which is very similar, and I stick stuff in it. I'm a great big. I love sticking. I have a stick with me continually because I just put things in. And what I love about my journal is it's all random. So anyone looking at it would think, well, this just doesn't make sense. If I want to read this like a book, this just doesn't follow any pattern. And I love that because it's random. It's just on that particular day. So I'm a great one for putting the date on. And so I can look back and say, oh, on that day, well, that's what I was thinking about. On that day, that's really interesting. And that again adds to my learning, and I'm thinking about, I'm developing things. And I notice in my journal that from the beginning to the end, there are several themes, and I can see the life of those themes developing from initial ideas to more formulated understandings. And I love that because it reminds me of my process. It kind of says, so that idea that I had made sense. I've got other things in here where I notice halfway through my journey it stops. There are either ideas where I've thought, no, that's not going to work, or there are ideas that are just on the back burner. They just need a bit more thought, and I will come back to them. So it's kind of a work in progress, and I love that about journals, that they're never completed, they're just works in progress. So anyone, if I was to leave this as I'm going to pick it up, well, I hope that they would read and kind of understand from me is that's indicative of where I was on that day.
Yeah.
Which I think is the cool thing about journaling, because it just kind of locates us to a moment in time in the here and now.
I had a friend recently who she journaled for many, many years and felt that she'd got to a point that, I've journaled on this particular thing and that's done, and she burnt all her journals and started afresh.
Wow.
So that's the that's the freedom of it.
Yeah.
We don't have to keep them as this neat set of books. We don't have to use them the right way up. We don't have to use them page by page. You write in one page, go to the back, write another, write in one page one way, turn the book upside down, write in it, tear a bit out the page, fold a bit of the page up, turn it landscape. When it's a portrait book, write it. It doesn't, as you guys have said, it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be how we imagine a written journal if it were printed and others were reading it. It's just total freedom, do what you want with it. Something I use if I'm feeling a bit stuck is I'll get 2 coloured pens. One is asking the questions and one is giving the answers. So I do that with myself if I'm feeling like I don't quite know what's going on here. Rather than just sitting with that feeling a bit stagnant, I'll turn it into a question. What's going on for you today? In one colour, then the answer, okay, what is going on for me? How do you feel about that? What do you want to do? So it's having that conversation with myself.
You've all made me feel much better about my approach to journaling, which is very chaotic. I've got 3 different size notebooks on the go, but they're all in the same place in my house, and I don't take them anywhere, so I just choose one of them. But it's just absolute chaos. Some of them have got poetry in, but upside down at the back, and some of them have got other things in. Yeah,
fantastic.
But you all made me feel much vindicated about
like
it.
you're doing journaling just right.
We find our way. We find our way. We can sometimes compare ourselves to how we hear others journal and think, well, I don't journal that way.
Yeah.
And we need to take that as a compliment, because actually that just reflects our
How
individuality.
different we are, I think we're getting towards wrapping up bit. Is there anything we haven't covered that you guys wanted to say?
I think the thing that just I would want to add, particularly from the therapeutic parts of self-learning, is that journaling can often provide opportunities to become unstuck. Sometimes we can feel stuck in terms of our thinking or stuck in terms of our emotions, and we don't quite know what to do about that. Journaling can often provide opportunities for us to create some movement. So there's movement in just putting it down on paper. There's some movement in beginning to trace or sketch the edges of it. Where is it? What is it that's causing me to feel stuck? And often when we do that, we actually find the doorway to being unstuck. It becomes far more clearer because we're getting it from outside of our head and our emotions onto the page. We can see it with a greater sense of distance. And that sense of movement can take us to a place where actually over a period of time we can become either less stuck or completely free. Whereas if we were to keep locating it in terms of our internal world, we collude with that stuckness. We just stay there. We don't help ourselves. We don't learn. We don't grow. We don't develop. So journaling often is the key to find the door, and then creates the door for us to move through.
Yeah.
I think I'd just like to say thanks to you for the questions, and thanks, Chev, because it's really, really interesting to hear both sides of it. We obviously come from the therapeutic angle predominantly, but to hear the other side and realise how much overlap there is and how very similar strategies focusing on slightly different things. So really great to hear that.
That's a real takeaway for me as well.
Yeah.
It's just how much overlap there is. I had an image of therapeutic journaling being this kind of very kind of lengthy, wordy, write all your emotions down. Kind of.
This is us you're talking to. This is us you're talking to.
I don't know where that comes from, but that's what I had in my head. So it's actually really nice to hear it isn't anything like that at all. That's great.
I'm really pleased you say that, because
really
if you're thinking it, you won't be alone.
No, you
so
won't
I'm
be
really
alone.
pleased that this podcast has allowed that opportunity for others to see, and probably the same for you. I probably, I maybe had a bit of a kind of concept in my head that a learning journal was maybe a bit more academic, a bit more kind of set. So it's lovely to hear there's
very
freedom
much
in
so.
both. It
Yeah.
makes me feel that that version of journaling is more accessible, and it sounds like you feel the same.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah, I was taking shape when you talked about moving from the abstract to knowledge, and that for me, because I was a bit like Rowan, thinking, I'm trying to get my head around it, but that's what we work with, from the abstract to the knowledge, that self knowledge. Abstract, where we can't quite see it, it's kind of conceptualizing, it's difficult, to that self knowledge, and it was part of the same.
It's knowing the context, isn't it? So I guess therapeutically you might go, I'm really angry, and that's quite an abstract concept, but then you need to understand why and where it's coming from, and that's when you start to apply it.
Absolutely.
The same is true in education and learning, where you go from a priori to a posteriori knowledge. So you can say, for instance, Scarlet is red. Yeah, that is a kind of logical statement, but it exists on its own. It doesn't apply to anything. But when you say all the roses in my garden are scarlet, then it has some context, and it has context because you need to understand what a garden is, you need to understand what a rose is, and you need to understand what scarlet is for it to make sense. So you start to require a context there to create some meaning, and that's where the real learning actually happens. That's when it starts to become applicable to the world around you and to your own kind of experiences.
Well, thank you guys for your time today, because I know how busy everyone is, so I really appreciate you coming to join me in the woods to talk about journals. I think it's probably going to be useful to lots of people listening as well. But we always like to finish by asking some closing questions, but because you guys have all done a couple of podcasts, you've already had our standard questions, so I had to think of some new ones. Well, the first one's not new because it changes every time, so my first question to finish off the podcast is, what are you reading or listening to right now? Because people always like recommendations. Chev, you can go first.
I'm currently listening to the Education Endowment Foundation podcast, which is sounds
a wordy title.
Yeah, it sounds it's the EEF podcast. It sounds really boring, but it's actually quite interesting.
Okay.
And I've been drawing quite a lot from there, which has been quite useful. And reading at the moment lots of academic papers, because I'm doing the last module of my master's, so just trawling through academic stuff around being an entrepreneur.
Nice.
Which is it's interesting. I'm enjoying it. Excellent. But some of it's hard going.
Yes, I can imagine. Pete, what about you?
Well, listening, I'm engrossed at the moment in a series of podcasts on history. I know Rowan was really interested to hear that I was doing listening to an episode on Australian Prime Ministers, which was particularly interesting. But currently, this morning, because coming here, Watergate and Nixon, looking at that, which again was fascinating. In terms of what I'm reading a fantastic biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who's one of my mentors, really, a bit of a hero of mine. Who was a philosopher and theologian, came into prominence in Nazi Germany back in the 30s. I'd probably better stop there, because once I get going, you won't
we'll have a book review.
So, yes.
Right, what about you?
I'm listening to, I guess it is a podcast, it's a few hours long on YouTube, a brain surgeon talking about our dreams and what just that kind of thing, what
really
our dreams
interesting.
Mean from a brain surgeon kind of neuroscience perspective.
Can you tell me afterwards in a nutshell?
Yes, I can. I'll share it with you. I'm reading A Spot of Bother by Mark Haddon, who wrote A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time. I'm really enjoying it. I enjoyed A Curious Incident, and he's got a good sense of humour, so that's a good read.
Excellent. Yeah. And my final question, I just had to try and bring in the outdoors somehow to the end of the podcast, so it's a bit tenuous, but anyway, we'll go with it. Any outdoorsy goals or plans for the second half of the year?
Well, I have a much longer term goal, which is around getting fit enough to climb the Matterhorn.
Sweet.
That won't be this year, but next couple of years. But
I'll come with you. I need to do some overseas mountains.
cool. As part of that, though, I have completely bizarrely started to enjoy running.
I was not expecting
No,
that.
me neither.
No, I wasn't expecting it either. It's kind of taken me a bit by surprise, but I've been running. It's like a 6k loop up to the trig point up on the top of the hill and back.
Amazing.
Sweet.
And it goes kind of down the river and through the woods and up the hill, and it's all very pretty. And I've actually weirdly really enjoyed it, which I did not think I would, because I hate running.
You take the mick out of the rest of us for running.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've kind of
Excellent.
taken myself a bit by surprise with that one.
Oh, I like that. What about you, Pete?
So I got back into the South Coast path, coastal path, either walking or riding, and really enjoyed that. It's made it easy. We've not had the footfall of tourists this summer, so that's made it a lot easier. But really enjoying that. Yeah,
Nice.
just breathtaking views.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Are you, Ray?
For me, it's starting small, really. So as you guys know, I have long COVID, and with a job that is predominantly kind of inside in meetings or sessions and that kind of thing. So trying to spend at least 10 minutes outside every day.
Nice.
I know it's a small goal, and for some people they'll go, what? Because they spend all day outside. But
Yeah, but there'll
being
also be people
mindful.
listening that don't spend any time outside.
Yeah.
So.
It's what Arthur Ashe said.
Oh, really?
Start where you are.
Yeah.
Use what you've got. Do what you can.
Yeah, exactly. So even if it's sat in the garden or
Yeah.
going the extra loop around the block before going from the car into the office or whatever.
Yeah. Excellent. Brilliant. Oh, well, thanks so much, guys, for your time today. I really enjoyed talking to you all.
Oh, it's been really
Yeah,
good fun.
thank you very
you.
much.
You're
Thank
most
you.
welcome. A big thank you to Rowan and Pete and Sheb for joining us to talk about journaling. It was a really interesting conversation and really fun, and I hope that you enjoyed listening and found it just as valuable as I enjoyed being there and taking part. As always, if you like the podcast, please do rate it, subscribe to it, share it with your friends, do all the things that mean that more people will be able to listen to us. We'll be back in a fortnight with another episode, but until then, thanks for listening.